Well, hi, welcome back, everyone. It's been a while since I made a video. It's just with the disability and everything. This is why I don't think I could ever manage a channel that was, really had high traffic and get paid to do this. Is I don't know that I could ever guarantee any kind of regular upload schedule. There's just so many days where my arm doesn't function at all, and I'm struggling just to make coffee. But I do like doing this because it gives me something to have a sense of accomplishment towards. And this one is not, scripted or anything. It won't be as long as the other was, hopefully. So this is just off the cusp of my head. And the topic is this Renee, good person. And if you don't know what's going on with that, the woman who was shot by the ICE agent, then you must live under a rock. So what I find interesting is throughout the entire discussion, the debate, the only thing that's really in question was is whether or not the ICE officer was hit by the vehicle or not. We don't know this for sure. But does that warrant the first shot of being self-defense? That is arguable. But then how do you argue the other two shots? But I'm not interested in having this debate because there's an issue that occurs within MAGA circles. So I don't know if I'll have screen caps or screenshots for you. If I include those, it's going to take longer to upload the video. It's going to take longer to make and all that sort of stuff. But I was watching The Line with Matt Dillahunty, who he's really, really good at logic, critical thinking, philosophy, and epistemology. And I really recommend people watching The Line because it kind of teaches people how to think, how to use logic and reason. But one of the callers, like a theist caller that he had, mostly what they do is theism versus anti-theism. They do political stuff from time to time. But he asked a question to them. Does it matter to you, and maybe I'm not getting it quite right, but he asked the caller, does it matter to you that what you're basing what you're basing reality on is based off of truth, fiction, or you don't care? And the caller basically said they didn't care. To which Matt Dillahunty responded by saying, "Goodbye, caller." Because at that point, the caller had submitted the position that he's not interested in if something is based off of truth, if something is based off of sound reasoning. That the caller only really cares that their narrative is supported, that what they believe to be true, even though there's no evidence for it, they'll make up evidence. And even if there's no evidence to make up, then they'll excuse it. They'll use poor rationality. They'll have poor reasoning, and they don't care that the reason is not based off of fact. They don't care that there's no evidence to support their position, to support their claim. They don't care that whether it's based on truth or not, and in fact, in some cases, may even prefer a lie to perpetuate the narrative, to perpetuate the belief. And I think really that's the problem that we're stuck in here, is that we're all looking at the same video, but we're walking away with different conclusions, different perspectives. And that's really interesting. So the question that I've been proposing is, I'm not interested in debating what happened in the video. It is interesting that people are watching the same video and seeing different things in what is clearly fact-based evidence of like physical evidence that's right in front of you. And people are watching the video, coming away saying that they saw different things in the same video. That's interesting, isn't it? But I think that's the reason why. That's the problem right there, is they don't care about what's fact. They don't care about fact-based evidence. They don't care about physical evidence. They don't care if the reason is not a good reason, deductively unsound epistemology or reasoning or logic. They don't care. The most important part for them is to do whatever possible that the ICE agent was in the right. Well, the question, though, that I've been more interested in is the idea that if non-compliance, because I've seen this thrown out, oh, well, she was non-compliant. She didn't get out of the car like she was told. She didn't do what she was asked. She just did what she was asked to do. Then she'd still be alive, and yada, yada, yada. Okay, that the position then is that if you're non-compliant, then law enforcement, regardless of agency, can use lethal force. That's the argument. Well, then my question is, does non-compliance warrant or necessitate the use of lethal force, yes or no? And the reason why that's an interesting question and an important question to ask is because if the answer is yes, if a person, regardless of what agency the law enforcement works for, any person is perceived as non-compliant by any law enforcement, regardless of agency, then lethal force is therefore warranted. If the answer to that is yes. Well, there's another case that gets brought up in all this. Charlie Kirk's case gets brought up, but that had nothing to do with compliant, non-compliant law enforcement, and etc. It has nothing to do with that. There is another case. There's actually plenty of cases. We'll get to that here in a second. So, if the answer is yes, then fine. Renee was non-compliant, and then if we live in a country where somebody is non-compliant with any law enforcement officer, regardless of agency, that warrants the use of lethal force. And she was non-compliant, therefore the ICE officer was justified. But that also means, if we go back to another case that's being brought up in the wake of this, Ashley Babbitt, a girl who was warned multiple times by a police officer within a crowd of which was chanting that they were in there. Whether they meant it or not, threats were being made that they were there to assault, capture, and even kill elected public officials. And a Capitol Police officer's job is to do everything in their power to protect those publicly elected officials at all costs. by any means necessary. And that police officer warned multiple times that if the crowd did not desist, he would open fire. Multiple times he shouted this out. They did not listen. They continued trying to push through the door, in which he pulled out his gun, warned again, in which they did not desist, and shot into the crowd, killing Ashley Babbitt. But if your answer was yes, then that means we can all shut up about Ashley Babbitt because she was non-compliant, and according to the philosophy of these people that answered yes, then that means that police officer was totally in his right to use lethal force. She was non-compliant, along with everyone else in the crowd. He would have been completely well within his right, according to this legal philosophy of non-compliance equates or warrants the use of lethal force. He would have been completely in his right to shoot every single one of them. Whether it caused critical injury or whether it caused death, he was in his right to do so. Because the people who answered yes, that is your position, is that you think non-compliance warrants lethal force. So that's what happened with Ashley Babbitt. She was non-compliant in a crowd of people who were all being non-compliant with police officer's demand, a law enforcement officer, and that ended up in her death. So we can all shut up about that, right? We can, okay, this was warranted, that happened, non-compliance, okay, let it go. We're going to be logically consistent. Except I don't expect MAGAs to be logically consistent. They never are. No. But that's the thing. If that's your position, if being non-compliant, anyone who's non-compliant, it doesn't matter if it's your father, if it's your mother, if it's your daughter, if it's your son, if it's you. Let's say your father uses meth and is struggling with meth addiction and has been in and out of being clean and whatnot. You really love and care about him. You want him to get clean. Gets pulled over by a law enforcement officer and has meth on them. Doesn't want to get caught and goes, oh my God, freaks out, steps on the gas, drives away, and the police officer pulls his gun out and shoots your father because he doesn't want to go to jail for meth. He wants to get away just long enough to throw the meth away. The people who answered yes, you have no place to complain that it's unfair being shot because he didn't want to go to jail over meth possession, and all he was doing was trying to get away to dispose of meth. I know he should have been arrested for possession of meth. I understand that's illegal and everything, but how can you shoot someone over a small possession of meth for personal use? Well, it doesn't matter, because you answered yes. Non-compliance, according to the people who answered yes, means that police are authorized, or any law enforcement officer of any agency, are authorized to use lethal force for non-compliance. So you can't complain. But the thing is that when it does happen to their mother, to their father, to their daughter, to their son, to themselves, somebody they love and care about, in a way that they see as unjustified in using lethal force, well, suddenly it's different, isn't it? So, if you answered no, that non-compliance should not equate to the use of lethal force, okay, then Ashley Babbitt deserves justice. And that police officer should be held on trial and go to jail for the shooting and murdering of Ashley Babbitt. And so does Renee. And so all the leftists, the people you perceive as left, which they don't have to be leftists. This This doesn't have to be a left and right thing. This is absolutely an issue of looking at law enforcement and how law is enforced and practiced, and how that should be done within society. But if your answer is no, that non-compliance should not equate to lethal force, then okay, fine. Ashley Babbitt deserves justice. But also, so does Renee, and that means you need to stop telling the people who are speaking out for Renee and wanting justice for her against that ICE agents, you need to stop telling them to shut up. Because you answered no. Now, here's the trick to it. If you ask me, well, I think deciding these matters in cases where law enforcement agents, regardless of what agency they work for, if they are using lethal force to non-compliance, figuring out whether they were justified in doing that, I think should be adjudicated. Because the thing is that interpreting these things with law is not black and white. It's not, oh, you're non-compliant, lethal force was needed, or, oh, you're non-compliant, you can't use lethal force. I think it depends on the situation, doesn't it? And there's many shades of gray, there's nuances, there's complexities. For example, the issue with Ashley Babbitt, the police officer was looking into a crowd of people literally chanting about doing harm to publicly elected officials who typically in the United States are seen as a protected class. Whether we like that or not, that's reality. The president, the executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, these people are considered important to our country, to our society, and that they help it go. They help it move forward. They do adjudication. They interpret law. They pass policies so that we can have food and health care and resources and etc. and so on and so forth. And this was a crowd of people who, for all intents and purposes, for the people who were up close, claim that they were quite threatening. So I think it depends, doesn't it? What level of danger was there? What level of threat? What are the proper protocols? And that's another thing I find interesting in the people who are engaging in these conversations. They're not engaging with things of what are the proper protocols in approaching a vehicle. What happens if you shoot a driver? Shooting a driver, I can tell you, is guaranteed not to make it stop. A vehicle, shooting the driver of a vehicle that's getting away, it doesn't matter if that person is a serial murderer, if they are wanted on a federal level, if this is a truly serious criminal that must be caught at all costs, and they are behind the wheel of a vehicle, shooting them puts a lot of people in danger because shooting the driver doesn't make the car stop. Cars have been manufactured with automatic acceleration for many, many, many years. Shooting the driver pretty much guarantees shock. If the person goes into shock, they could tense up all their muscle and press down on the accelerator and accelerate faster. Even if they don't, they could even if they die and they don't go into shock, they could seize up from death and rigor mortis and accelerate. Or they could die and maybe they stop pressing on the gas pedal, but the car has automatic acceleration, so it'll keep moving until it hits something that makes it stop. which other human beings do not cause cars to stop. Cars will run over human beings, causing critical injury, if not death, and keep moving. Human beings, including other law enforcement officers, regardless of agency within the area, could have been hit, including children, including innocent bystanders and civilians that just happen to be in the area, and also leading to massive amount of property damage, because there are many different types of property that the car could hit that would not stop it. So it's pretty much not going to stop until it hits a building, some kind of blockade, another vehicle, etc. Which is why in the protocols it says, don't ever shoot a driver. If somebody's driving away, you can shoot the tires out, but don't shoot the driver. But they don't want to engage in that topic. They don't even want to entertain what the proper protocols are in law enforcement and how they're supposed to handle somebody behind the wheel trying to get away. The other thing that I find interesting, too, is self-defense. Maybe the first shot can be rationalized in front of a court as self-defense, but how do you rationalize the other two shots that were clearly in the video done when the officer was far out of danger? I don't think that officer did so in self-defense. Maybe the first shot could be rationalized. But how do you rationalize the other two shots? When it clearly appears that the person is fleeing from a law enforcement officer of a certain type of agency for their life. And here's the question that I have is, do we want to live in a society where law enforcement agents, law enforcement officers, regardless of the agency that they work for, can decide whether they use lethal force or not impunitively without question? And that any time that they use lethal force and kill a civilian, that this should never be done with, that we should never question it, we should accept it, no matter what, that it's always justified, no matter what. And, Do we want a law enforcement that's like that? That is assuming, if we do that, that is assuming that all law enforcement agents, regardless of what agency they work for, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, whatever, that the individual is not using their position in law enforcement as an abuse of power, that they're not using it to rape individuals, to murder individuals, to harass, beat, abuse, terrify, and all kinds of things. If we live in such a system where law enforcement officers and agents can just use lethal force whenever they deem, whenever they want, whenever they feel like it, without question, what are we to do as civilians when a law enforcement agent is using their position of authority to impose fear and terror, or try to rape us, try to murder us, try to inflict violence upon us, not because we've done anything wrong, not because we've done anything illegal, but simply because they want to? What system of justice do we have in place to do something about that, to hold corrupt law enforcement officers accountable to their actions, or even somebody who was negligent? And maybe they aren't corrupt, maybe they're not murderous, but because they were negligent in their duties, it led to someone being harmed significantly. And then where's the responsibility and accountability in that? How do we hold them responsible and accountable for that? Because in a system where law enforcement officers are never questioned when they use lethal force at all, that it's always assumed that this is done so that they can do their job no matter what, then you have civil rights lawyers no longer exist. And they can go around and abuse their power as much as they want, steal your stuff. And if you fire back, you're the bad guy. If you defend yourself, you're the bad guy. If you get shot, you're presumed to be a bad guy, even if you've done nothing wrong. So what do we do then? How do we hold them accountable when we can't? How do we seek justice when we can't? Is that really a system you want to live in, where as long as somebody's a law enforcement officer, they can literally do whatever they want? And you will never see any justice for anything they do to you. Shoot your children, shoot your wife, rape you, steal your stuff. What do you do about that? Is that really a system you want to live in? So with the adjudication, what adjudication is designed to do is in a court, using due process, you put the officer on the stand in front of a judge, in front of a jury, where they examine all evidence. You have eyewitness testimony, which is not really very valid. Eyewitness testimony is highly unreliable. In fact, in Renee's case, they talked to many eyewitnesses, and pretty much every single one of them had a different account of the events. You have video. There's 3 different videos that have been pulled. The ICE officer himself and 2 different bystanders. They look at, bring in ballistic analysts who sit there and shoot bullets at things like glass and various objects and stuff from different angles and stuff, and figure out what makes sense given the laws of physics and how guns and bullets and works at different angles and positions and what they do. And what happens when the bullet hits different material, like flesh or glass or tempered glass or metal. And they come in and they give their analysis, looking at the video, looking at the picture and everything. And I think this happened. And then after all the evidence is presented, the jury and the judge decide, okay, was this self-defense, yes or no? Was the first shot warranted, but not the next 2? Were all 3 shots warranted? Was lethal force necessary? Was she non-compliant? And that's what adjudication is for, is to look at all of those things to decide, was lethal force in this case necessary? Instead, what seems to be occurring is we're trying to do a trial by social media based on our political position and our own little opinions, even though none of us, the vast majority of the people commenting, have no expertise or experience in criminal law and investigation and detective work or anything like that. The opinion base is that it just seems to be the MAGA, the right-wing supporters, are just defending the ICE agent at whatever cost by any means necessary, regardless if even from a legal interpretation it's completely in the wrong, and by granting him this, you are opening up a can of worms that creates a society in which a law enforcement agency, a law enforcement officer, regardless of agency, can use lethal force at their discretion without any question. And it's not contestable in court. So you win. Renee is it's excusable. Don't even need to go to court. Until an officer shoots your daughter, or your son, your father, or your mother, or your spouse, right? Especially if you know that these people that you love and care about were shot and killed, that lethal force was used, maybe even just critically injured, and they didn't break any law at all. Or even if they did break a law, it was a minor one, like a minor traffic violation. They didn't stop at the stop sign for a grand total of 30 seconds. They didn't turn their turn signal on exactly at 5,000 feet. Or is it 2,000 feet? Yeah, 5,000 feet. And were pulled over for a ticket and then was shot because they got into their pocket to pull out their wallet to show their driver's license and proof of insurance, and not being from that area, don't know that the police are on high guard and end up getting shot. And this is no longer contestable. And so when that happens and you rush to social media and say an injustice has occurred, this person that I care about, they vote Republican and stuff, they were killed by a law enforcement officer, regardless of agency, unlawfully over something that was trivial, something that was meaningless, they didn't break any laws, whatever. You will have no right to post that, because you are pushing us towards a system and where law enforcement officers, regardless of what agency they work for, can use lethal force without question. Is that a system that you really want to live in? And again, there's all these questions that pop up in my head, like, what do you do when you have a law enforcement officer who is actually abusing their power? And now, when I look at this ICE agent and the Renee situation, was Renee and her wife kind of mouthy with the ICE officer? Yes. But does that warrant lethal force? No. No, it does not. That's not illegal in the United States. You can tell a police officer to go fuck themselves. You can tell them you hate them. This also means, too, if you are of this persuasion, all these sovereign citizen right-wingers that think that the police have no right to pull them over or this, that, and the other, they need to stop talking, because now every single time they do that, the police officer has every right, or law enforcement officer of any agency has any right to use lethal force without question. Since we're not taking laws into consideration, what is actually legal, what is actually illegal anymore. And this is the problem that I see in the MAGA world. They're not defending what is actual, like, proper law enforcement, what is actual proper procedure and protocol. No. They're defending a ideology. They are defending a narrative. And they're not even taking into consideration the long-term consequence and effect of defending that narrative, defending that story. Maybe we should be questioning if that ICE officer's response was legitimate or not. And we need to figure that out instead of just assuming it was or wasn't. We need to figure out if it was or wasn't. Because I can guarantee you do not want to live in a society where law enforcement officers, regardless of the agency that they work for, can just indiscriminately decide to use lethal force whenever they want, regardless of the situation. I do not think Renee, looking at her, this is not a dangerous person. Her driving off poses no threat to society. All the MAGA people, they are rushing to defend the ICE officer because it's not about law. It's not about being logically consistent. It's not being rational. It's not having a good reason to think and believe the things that you think and believe. It's not about that. It's not even about fact-based evidence and physical evidence. It is simply about defending the actions of this ICE officer, no matter what. Because it's what Trump wants. It's what J.D. Vance wants. It's what Jesse Waters on Fox News wants. It's an agenda. And it's not actually about what's right or wrong. So there was a whole series of questions that I had. Let me try to pull this up. Many of them responding refused to. Yeah, okay. It said, look at the laugh emojis by other people. Laugh emojis are not any kind of answer. They don't answer the questions or engage with the topics that need to be considered. This is a common act I see amongst people looking to debate, which most people do not know what proper debate is. But many of them respond this way and refuse to engage with the questions brought before them. By the way, what you are proposing is going against the police reports based on many eyewitness reports, multiple videos gathered, and ballistic investigations. That's pretty amazing to say one knows more than another who has seen physical evidence that no one else has seen because we do not have access to it. Now there is a release of someone standing out in a crowd chanting, "We assassinated one of you." And we do not even know what is meant by one of you. Do they mean a Democrat, a leftist? How do we know what she was registered as? Renee, how do we know what she was registered? For all we know, Renee, just because she was a lesbian and against ICE, doesn't mean she's a registered Democrat. It doesn't mean that she's a leftist. She could be a registered independent that traditionally votes for Republicans, but just doesn't appreciate the Trump administration and the things that he's doing. There's many registered Republicans that do not appreciate the Trump administration and what they're doing. Quite a few of them, actually, even ones that protest against ICE. How do we know she's not a part of that? And there are plenty of LGBTQ people that are registered Republicans as well. This information hasn't been released. Do you think that person who is chanting, "We assassinated one of you," cares about what the facts are? Do you think that person cares about due process and whether or not law enforcement agents of any agency is following laws to protect civilians? What does her political leanings have to do with whether or not what the ICE agent did was an abuse of power or not? Is it healthy that we are living in a society that is promoting someone bragging about another human being's death? This is not healthy, and a lot of this is pretty sick. For all we know, this woman could have been a registered Republican or independent that has typically voted Republican, but just doesn't support the Trump administration, which there are many of. Why is it being normalized to have militarized people with military gear roaming around our streets enforcing laws that have nothing to do with local laws? This is not normal. This is not American, and this is not freedom. So the thing is that there are many more questions than I had than this. I wrote a very, very, very long thing breaking it all down. I don't want to read all of it, though, but I think that these are important aspects of this situation is and I don't see the point in debating or arguing with MAGA, because going back to the lying conversation with Matt Dillahunty, a lot of the times it doesn't seem like they care if it's based on fact, if it's based on sound logic and reason. It seems like they only care about pushing forward the narrative, about defending an ideology. You know, there's a pink unicorn standing behind me. And, you know, I look behind me and I say, no, there's not. I cannot physically see it. I cannot smell it. I cannot touch it. I cannot taste it. There is no evidence that it's there, and I just can't sense it with my sensory organs. If it was standing there, then it would be kicking and knocking into things, maybe putting holes in the wall, leaving piles of shit on the floor. Literal evidence that it's not there, and still they would sit there and claim, no, it's there. You just can't see it. The reason there's not shit on the floor is because it doesn't poop. Why isn't it knocking into things? Because it's really smart and it walks around them. How come I can't see it? Because you can only see it if you know it's there. There's a problem with that logic in and of itself. You know, and that's the issue of why I'm getting tired of debating MAGA. I'm getting tired of debating conservatives. I'm getting tired of debating right-wingers or arguing with them, because it seems completely pointless. The Constitution is relevant until it's not. The founding fathers are relevant until they're not. There is no ground base to work from at all. It's an ever-changing goalpost. It's a constant red herring. And I personally think that ICE agent, I don't think he shot her in self-defense. I think he shot her because he was frustrated that she talked back. I think that's why. I think he was just mad. He was pissed. And that's why he did it. And apparently he has a history of doing that. Apparently that's something he's done in the past, which is why he no longer works for a local law enforcement agency and now works for the ICE department. It's because the ICE law enforcement agency has lowered their guidelines so much to allow someone who's been let go from a police force for doing something very similar by creating a situation and where he used lethal force unlawfully and was let go for that. Put himself in a position where he could come up with an excuse of why he did that. And so, like, to reiterate, well, actually, hold on. Let me see if I can pull up, because aside from the question of does non-compliant automatically, should that automatically warrant lethal? And it's funny, like, I'm looking at this and they're just like, look at the video, look at the video, look at the video, look at the video. It's like, I'm not asking that. I'm asking if non-compliance warrants lethal force, yes or no. It's a yes or no question. Here we go. Here's the problem with the position of being posited. The first shot is already in question of self-defense. How is it that we can rationally make the claim that after one shot, that two more shots followed after the initial shot is in self-defense? Especially, as clearly seen in the video, the person was shooting at, the person he was shooting at was clearly fleeing. How are two more shots after a first initial shot considered self-defense when the person he is shooting at is literally fleeing from him? Is it self-defense when someone is running away from you out of fear for their life? And while fleeing from you, you fire two more rounds into the person after you have already shot them once? Would it stand to reason that if you shot a person once and they began to flee from you for their safety and fear of their own life, that two more shots for the so-called purpose of self-defense is no longer warranted? One shot fired, you can rationalize in court self-defense. Two more after that, while the person is literally fleeing for their life, is no longer self-defense. That's just flat out murder. That is the question, though. And it is really interesting that it is only conservatives that are making this claim. What determines whether a person has been shot in self-defense or not should not rest upon what our political lines are. It should be based on fact, evidence, and deductive reasoning. Are there any cases in where even though a person is of a branch of federal or local law enforcement and where that person is abusing their power and authority to cause fear and harm to others. Does that exist? And do civilians have the right to flee in self-defense of their life and deserve justice when a member of any branch of law enforcement breaks the law? Should we defend the actions of law enforcement of any branch without question, and if so, why? How are we to hold account law enforcement of any branch that uses their position to incite fear, terror, threaten one's life, liberties, and liberties as promised by Constitution, state, and federal right, or even up to and including theft and murder? How is it self-defense when the woman was, as seen in all three videos, literally trying to run from the ICE agent out of fear? Who was the bigger threat? The man pointing a loaded gun at a suburban house mom, or the suburban house mom trying to run away from the ICE officer holding a loaded gun at her head? This line of questioning is to draw into question whether the act of shooting not one shot, which is already a breach of proper protocol, not 2 shots, but 3 shots considered self-defense? Or is it more likely this officer was pissed that she wouldn't comply and shot her as a form of forced control? And is that something we want out of law enforcement? And if that is the case, that we do that is the case, what do we do when any law enforcement of any agency is abusing their power to where your life is literally in danger and you have done nothing wrong? This is a really important question, and I think anyone listening to this video really needs to think about it and take it seriously. Let me just say this. I know about a case of a local law enforcement agency that got sued over this, because there are law enforcement officers that abuse their power, absolutely 100%. And we should not just allow them to do these things without question. We should not just automatically defend the ICE agent because he's an ICE agent, somebody lost their life. This isn't something that just leftists have to worry about. It's not just something that gay people, LGBTQ people have to worry about. It's not something that just BIPOC people have to worry about. It's not something that just women have to worry about. You, everyone, even if you are a conservative watching this, have to worry about, because if that becomes the staple norm, you're fucked. Do we want law enforcement to be able to do whatever they want without question? Should their actions always be defended, no matter what? I don't think they should, and I think adjudication is proper. Because surveying the level of threat involved is important. Understanding the agent involved is important. Understanding the person they've done something to is important. But just as an example, that this is why we don't just automatically defend law enforcement no matter what they do. Years ago, there's a local municipality that got sued. She did do something that was against the law. She was driving drunk. She shouldn't have done. And there's a proper protocol for that. She gets pulled over. Now, you're supposed to be ticketed You're supposed to be taken to a cell where you sober up and everything, and you can go back and get the car later. This police officer had this woman get out of the car. Instead of charging her with a DUI, or DWI, which does warrant an arrest, absolutely, he held his gun at this woman and forced her to strip naked. This was in the winter. There was snow on the ground. It was only like 13, 20 degrees outside. He had her stripped naked and had her walk home in the snow naked. He had her walk on the sidewalk that had not been plowed while he drove on the street next to her while she was trying to cover her naked body in tears, trying to walk home nude in the snow. If we presume the actions of all law enforcement is just automatically okay, because you don't like the politics of maybe you don't like, maybe that woman who was forced to walk naked in the snow, she was a leftist. Does that mean it's okay to do that? Because that means that it's not just leftists that have to walk home naked in the snow. It means it's the conservatives too. Because that becomes the standard, that becomes the norm. That becomes how we practice law. That becomes how we enforce law. The other question I have is that if there is a law enforcement officer who is abusing their power, and they're terrifying you, you're scared for your life, you've done nothing wrong, but they're insisting you have, they're going to throw you under the bus, they're going to frame you, they're going to strip away your civil rights, liberties, and freedoms because they just don't like you. And they pull out a gun, loaded gun, and they're threatening to shoot you. Do you have the right to run for your life, or is that non-compliant? Those are just some questions to think about, and I think they're very important questions to think about, and I find it interesting. These questions are not being thought about, they're not being engaged with, and they're not really being taken very seriously and answered very seriously. And understood that the way that you answer those questions can affect how law enforcement of any agency, any officer, polices us, the citizens, regardless of your political affiliation. That's something to think about. Another thing to think about is, do you want law enforcement officers to, it's pretty common that teenagers are pretty rebellious. Do you want a law enforcement officer to look at a snot-nosed teenager who just needs an attitude adjustment, the law enforcement officer to open fire on them because they're being non-compliant, being kind of a shithead? What if that teenager is your own son, your own daughter? This stuff too is not normal. It's not normal to have people that are not familiar with the area that they're in. They did not grow up here as citizens in the city that I live in. These are foreign invaders from other cities who have no idea about this area. They don't know the community. They don't know the people. It's not normal. It's like, this isn't freedom. This isn't liberty. This isn't pursuit of happiness, manifest destiny. This isn't right to peace and quiet. This isn't right to privacy. The disabled man can't even walk to the fucking park without being stopped by an ICE agent and asked for birth certificate, driver's license, social security card. Very, very, very personal information, very private information. It's like, when can we go back to just going to our jobs without being harassed? When can we go back to just walking to the park without being harassed? When can we go back to having peace and quiet? When can we go back to privacy? When can we go back to having freedom? Because they put all these ICE officers in the cities to say, oh, we're going to make you safe. Well, a lot of people don't feel safer. Actually, quite the opposite. Now we're all terrified that we could be shot and killed, and then all the MAGAs on the internet will rush to defend it. Even if it's one of their own, they will paint you up as a leftist, deserving and warranting of death because you dared to take a breath. Just some things to think about. Some things to think about. And also, I think you have some really big issues. If you do not care if your basis for reality is not based on fact, if you would prefer it based on fiction, on lies, if you don't care, then you're literally saying you're not interested in truth. You're interested in what makes you feel good. You cannot argue logic and reason with somebody who's being irrational. And that is the very definition of irrational when you say, I do not care if my understanding of reality is based on fiction. I'm going to wrap that up. So, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And if it wasn't clear in the video, if there are any conservatives watching this video, I am not interested in having a debate with you down in the comments. It seems pointless. There is nothing I can say that is gonna change anything. I don't think you guys care about truth. I don't think conservatives care about freedom. I don't think you care about manifest destiny. I don't think you care about pursuit of happiness. I don't think you care about civil rights. I don't think you care about rights in general. I don't think you care about any of that. I don't think you care about the Constitution. I don't think you care about the Founding Fathers. I think you only care about supporting an ideology and pushing forward a narrative. I don't think law enforcement officers should use lethal force willy-nilly and without question. I think if they do use lethal force, that should be drawn into question. There are instances where it's warranted, and there are instances where it's not. A police officer should not be forcing, even though, yes, you shouldn't drive drunk, and that is illegal. You should follow the proper protocols. You should not force somebody to walk naked in the snow at gunpoint. And, just for fun, I'm going to look this up. Cases of law enforcement using lethal force illegally on conservatives. Oh, here's a bunch of articles about conservatives where law enforcement have used lethal force illegally. Simple Google search. Now let's replace conservatives with liberals. Oh, look, another series of like just pages and pages and pages in a Google search of cases where that's happened. So, is that the norm you want to set? Is that the precedent you want to set? It's fine now until it's a conservative. By the time it's a conservative, it'll be too late because you already set the norm. You should think about that if you are conservative. And no, I'm not interested in debating you if you are conservative because, like I said, you're not interested in truth. You don't care about fact-based evidence. You don't care about physical, tangible evidence. You only care about pushing a narrative and an ideology, which requires you to cherry-pick evidence if it exists. If there isn't evidence to cherry-pick, then you make it up. And if your reason is broken reasoning or unsound epistemology, if it's bad reasoning, bad logic, then you don't care. You just keep rationalizing and making fallacies and engage in sophistry and rhetoric. And it's irritating because we can't have a grown-up conversation if you're doing that. If you're a leftist and want to talk to me about it, I'm completely open to that, but I'm not going to debate conservative. I'm not going to debate people who let's reverse the pink unicorn. Let's say we discovered pink unicorns, and I literally brought one and put it in front of you. What the conservative does with this stuff is that because they're fixated on narrative and not evidence, if I literally I could sit here and say, oh, well, we do have evidence. We figured out the genome, the speciation, where they came from, everything, map it all out. Here it is. Here's pictures. And they'd sit there and say, nope, this is all not real. It's all AI. It's made up. It's not real. It doesn't exist. So then you go off and you bring one in and put a pink unicorn right in front of them where they can touch it, they can smell it, they can interact with it. It shits on the floor, it kicks over tables. And they'll sit there and be like, no, that it's not there. That's, I don't know, like that's just a horse that you glued a horn on. And you take the horn and you pull on it. No, this is real. Here's the genome, all this other stuff. No, it's not. It's not real because you need it to be the case that it's not. You're not interested in evidence. You're not interested in fact-based. You're not interested in fact-based evidence. You're not interested. So what's the point? You're going to defend that ICE agent no matter what. No matter what. And the thing that I'm trying to get through is that you should think about how dangerous that is, because if that becomes the norm and the precedent, by the time they shoot one of your kids or your wife or yourself or someone else, you won't have an argument left to stand on, because that's the new norm and it's been the precedent you set just so you could stick it to the libs. Not something you should seriously think about and not just be like, no, never happened, cry some more, libtard, something. And it's like, that's not an argument. That's nothing. That's trash. That's garbage. It doesn't mean anything. You're not taking it seriously. What's the point? What's the fucking point? Anyway, so my fellow leftists, I'll be happy to talk to you in the comments when my fingers aren't stiff and numb and it's not painful to. Happy to. maybe these questions are things that you can bring up too. And part of me wants to say, like, us as leftists, like, maybe we should just stop engaging with them. What's the point? Let them go on and on and on about it and throw their parties and everything. Oh, look, a leftist died. Yay. Let them throw their party. And then once one of them, one of their MAGAs, because that's how we're dividing everybody up now, is tribalistic and stupid, instead of, conducting things seriously and equal accountability and responsibility and all that. And one of them gets shot by an ICE agent or something over some bullshit. And they take to the internet, oh no, this is unfair, this is unjust. And then they can sit there and watch as the president and vice president and the cabinet says, oh, they're a radical leftist and say things that aren't true. And then all the other MAGAs start believing that and pushing that narrative. And we should just let it go. This is what you wanted. It's what you wanted. Stop complaining. You got what you wanted. So, I don't know. Like, share, subscribe, and comment and all that. Lately, I've been watching a lot of Westside Tyler. I'm trying to understand this guy. I've seen him a lot. I don't know why I'm mentioning that, but I don't know. I'm just going to end it. Yeah, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that sort of stuff. Hit the bell button and blah, 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 blah. Maybe I could make this into a job. I don't know. Probably not. I'm a nobody. Out.